Some bikes were built for speed, others for danger. From unpredictable death traps to machines so powerful they're banned from public roads. These are the 15 most dangerous motorcycles ever built. And it all starts with a two-stroke monster from 1972. Number 15, the 1972 Kawasaki H2 Mach 4. This motorcycle didn't just earn the nickname the Widowmaker, it truly deserved it. The Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 of 1972 is one of the most infamous motorcycles in history, known for its brutal power delivery and volatile handling. It was a machine that challenged even the most skilled riders and often punished the slightest mistake with catastrophic consequences. At the time, Kawasaki was engaged in the horsepower wars, fiercely competing to build the fastest and most powerful street-legal motorcycles. The H2 was Kawasaki's answer, a 750cc two-stroke, three-cylinder engine that produced a staggering 74 horsepower. This power figure was unprecedented for its time and packed into a relatively lightweight frame that tipped the scales at just about 460 pounds dry. What set the H2 apart and made it so dangerous was how its power came on. Unlike modern bikes with smooth, predictable power curves, the H2's throttle response was immediate and brutal. The engine had very little torque at low revs, then suddenly unleashed a violent surge of power at higher RPMs, often catching riders off guard. This power band phenomenon meant that the bike could instantly lift the front wheel into a wheelie or cause the rear tire to lose traction, especially on loose or uneven surfaces. Riders quickly found that controlling the H2 required skill beyond the average street motorcyclist. The frame was relatively flexible compared to modern standards, and the suspension was primitive, far from capable of taming the bike's explosive nature. Coupled with drum brakes that struggled to slow down the machine at high speed, riders often found themselves fighting the bike rather than riding it smoothly. Because of these handling and braking limitations, the H2 was prone to high-speed instability, including dangerous tank slappers, where the handlebars violently oscillated from side to side. Combined with rough, less-than-ideal road conditions of the 1970s and limited safety gear, this made riding the H2 a high-risk endeavor. The motorcycle quickly gained notoriety in the media and among riders, earning the grim title Widowmaker. Stories of novice riders crashing on their first rides, experienced riders being thrown off mid-corner, and countless hospitalizations became all too common. Some riders simply avoided the bike altogether, while others treated it as a challenge, testing their limits on a machine that demanded respect and razor-sharp focus. In hindsight, the Kawasaki H2 Mach 4 was a groundbreaking motorcycle that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in its era. But it was also a stark reminder that raw power without sufficient control and safety features can be deadly. It embodies the era's fearless spirit, but also its brutal risks. But power wasn't the only thing that made bikes dangerous. Some were built with flaws that turned every ride into a risk. And no machine exposed that more brutally than the Suzuki TL1000Ss. Number 14, the 1997 Suzuki TL1000 Series. Sometimes the most dangerous motorcycles aren't the ones with the most power. They're the ones that should have been safe but weren't. The Suzuki TL1000Ss looked like a smart, aggressive answer to Ducati's V-twins. It had a liquid-cooled 996 cubic centimeter V-twin engine that pushed out around 125 horsepower and could hit speeds close to 160 miles per hour. It was fast, but not unreasonably so. That wasn't the issue. The danger came from something far worse, a critical design flaw that turned the TL1000s into a death trap at high speeds. Instead of a conventional rear shock absorber, Suzuki fitted the TL with a rotary damper, an experimental setup meant to save space and offer smoother handling. But it didn't. The damper overheated quickly, lost effectiveness, and caused the rear end of the bike to behave unpredictably. Under hard acceleration or aggressive cornering, riders would feel the rear start to wobble. And that instability triggered a terrifying phenomenon known as a tank slapper, where the handlebars violently shake back and forth. It could happen without warning, and it could send you straight into the pavement. The situation got so bad that Suzuki had to issue a recall and start fitting steering dampers to all new units. But by then, the damage was done. The TL1000s had already developed a reputation as one of the most unpredictable sport bikes ever released. But if the TL1000s was dangerous because of modern experimentation, the next bike was dangerous for a much older reason. It was raw, twitchy, and totally uncontrollable. Let's talk about the Suzuki TM400 Cyclone. Number 13, the 1971 Suzuki TM400 Cyclone. The Suzuki TM400 Cyclone earned a brutal reputation in the motocross world. Not because it was fast, but because it was unforgiving in the worst possible ways. This wasn't a bike that gave you second chances. Launched during the dirt bike boom of the early 1970s, Suzuki wanted a race-winning machine that could dominate off-road. What they built instead was a two-wheeled hand grenade. At the heart of the Cyclone was a 396 cubic centimeter air-cooled two-stroke single-cylinder engine. It made about 40 horsepower, which may not sound extreme until you realize it came all at once. There was no smooth throttle response. It was either off or violently on. Riders often compared it to flipping a switch. 1 second you were crawling, and the next, the front wheel was in the air and the rear was sliding out. That wouldn't have been so bad if the frame, suspension, or brakes could keep up. But they couldn't. The TM400 was dangerously light, just around 220 pounds dry, and the steel frame flexed under stress. The suspension bottomed out hard on jumps. And with drum brakes front and rear, stopping power was always a gamble. Even experienced riders struggled to keep it under control. And the beginners didn't stand a chance. It didn't take long for the Cyclone to earn its other names, the Bonebreaker, and the Widowmaker of the Dirt. And while the TM400 was deadly off-road, the next bike brought that same level of risk to the open road, wrapped in sleek black metal. Number 12 is the 1955 Vincent Black Shadow. The Vincent Black Shadow was the world's first superbike, and it came with a reputation as dark and intimidating as its name. In the mid-1950s, few machines could even come close to its performance. It was powered by a 998 cubic centimeter air-cooled V-twin engine that pushed out around 55 horsepower. That gave it a top speed of over 125 miles per hour at a time when most cars struggled to reach 70. For many riders, it was the fastest thing they'd ever touched. For some, it was the last. The danger wasn't just in the speed, it was in how little the bike could do to protect you. The Black Shadow had power, but it didn't have the modern frame rigidity, suspension, or braking systems needed to keep that power under control. Its chassis flexed at high speeds. Its brakes, dual drums, were barely adequate, especially on wet roads or during emergency stops. The handling was twitchy. One small mistake at full tilt, and the rider was gone. Even experienced racers respected the Vincent's bite. The Black Shadow didn't earn its reputation by accident. Police departments in the United Kingdom used it to chase down criminals, but off-duty riders often found themselves on the wrong end of that power. There were crashes, fatalities, and a long-standing fear of what this bike could do if you pushed it just a little too far. But if the Vincent Black Shadow was dangerous because it was too fast for its own era, the next bike took things even further by cramming 8 cylinders into a machine that nearly shook itself apart. Number 11 is the 1955 Moto Guzzi F8. This was the kind of motorcycle that made even professional racers nervous. Built for Grand Prix competition in the mid-1950s, the Moto Guzzi F8 wasn't just ahead of its time, it was almost too advanced for its own good. At the heart of the bike was an unbelievable 500-centimeter liquid-cooled V8 engine. That's right, 8 cylinders in a racing motorcycle. It produced around 78 horsepower and reached top speeds over 170 miles per hour, making it one of the fastest bikes in the world at the time. But the problem wasn't speed. It was everything else. In an era where most bikes had simple drum brakes, basic frames, and skinny tires, the Moto Guzzi F8 pushed performance into territory that no other part of the bike or the rider could comfortably handle. It had a screaming red line and required aggressive throttle input just to get into its power band. The slightest miscalculation could send the rear wheel sliding or the bike shaking violently beneath the rider. The tires couldn't grip. The brakes couldn't stop. The suspension couldn't absorb the force, and the frame flexed under pressure like a twig. Even factory riders were scared of it. Many chose not to race it at all. The engine was notoriously complex and hard to maintain, and very few mechanics could keep it running properly. It wasn't just dangerous because of poor engineering. It was dangerous because it was too smart, too fast, and too early. And if the Moto Guzzi 5.8 was an engineering experiment gone too far, the next bike was something else entirely. An old-school legend built for speed, but with zero regard for safety. Number 10 is the Browse Superior SS100. In its time, it was called the Rolls-Royce of motorcycles. But under all the elegance and polish, the Browse Superior SS100 was an untamed machine. It wasn't just fast for the era. It was fast, period. This was a motorcycle that came with a factory guarantee. It would hit 100 miles per hour, or it wouldn't leave the shop. And in the 1920s, that kind of promise wasn't just bold. It was borderline suicidal. The SS100 was powered by a 998 cubic centimeter V twin engine. It made around 73 horsepower, an astonishing figure back then, and the bike weighed just under 400 pounds. The power-to-weight ratio was dangerous enough, but combine that with primitive roads, limited safety gear, and nearly non-existent suspension, and you had a perfect recipe for disaster. The tires weren't designed for triple-digit speeds, the brakes were rudimentary, and the rigid chassis had no forgiveness. At full speed, the bike shook, rattled, and bounced over bumps like a live wire. If you lost control, there were no crash helmets to save you. You just got what you got. Even more sad, this was the motorcycle that British war hero T. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia, was riding when he crashed and died. His accident was so infamous, it actually triggered research into head injuries and helped push the development of the motorcycle helmet. That's how deadly the SS100 was. And while the Bro was dangerous because of the era it came from, the next bike came from a time of innovation and used that power to launch riders straight into the danger zone. Meet the Yamaha VMAX number 9, the 1985 Yamaha VMAX. When Yamaha released the VMAX in 1985, it instantly changed the game on what a cruiser could be. It didn't care about comfort. It wasn't built for balance. It was built for speed and brute force acceleration. At the center of it was a massive 1,197 centimeters liquid-cooled V4 engine producing around 145 horsepower. And thanks to Yamaha's V-Boost system, that power hit like a hammer when the revs climbed above 6,000. The VMAX wasn't about top speed. It was about how fast it got there. Riders described launching from stoplights like they were being fired from a slingshot. But with all that muscle came serious risk. The bike was heavy, nearly 600 pounds wet. But its frame and suspension weren't built to handle the kind of raw power it delivered. At full throttle, the VMAX could feel like it was tearing itself apart. Front-end lift, rear-end wiggle, and mid-corner instability were all on the table. It didn't help that early models had limited braking performance, relying on dual front discs and a single rear disc that simply couldn't rein in the chaos once it was unleashed. What made it even more dangerous was its ability to fool riders. It looked like a cruiser. It rode like a muscle bike. But at heart, it was a barely contained drag racer. Many riders bought it expecting something manageable, only to realize too late that it was raw, relentless, and almost impossible to tame. But the danger didn't stop in the 80s. In fact, one of the riskiest bikes on the market today looks deceptively modern. Number 8 is the Harley-Davidson Sportster S. The Sportster S was Harley-Davidson's big leap into a new generation. Gone was the old-school rumble. In came the Revolution Max, a 1,252 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin that cranked out 121 horsepower and 94 pound-feet of torque. That's serious output for a bike with such a stripped-down design. But the real danger wasn't in the engine, was in the setup. The Sportster S weighs just over 500 pounds wet, light for a Harley. But with that short wheelbase, stiff suspension, and aggressive power delivery, the bike feels twitchy. It accelerates fast and the power hits hard, especially for riders coming from cruisers or lower-tier Harleys. It's easy to misjudge, and that's where the trouble begins. The bike sits low, but that doesn't mean it hugs the ground. At high speeds, especially on rough pavement or during quick direction changes, the Sportster S can feel unsettled and unpredictable. Then there's the braking. A single disc up front and one in the rear. Both Brembo, yes, but for a machine that can hit over 130 miles per hour, it's not exactly overbuilt. And while the electronics help, they don't save riders from underestimating the bike's raw delivery. It looks calm. It sounds clean. But twist the throttle too hard, and the Sportster S shows its teeth. And if you thought modern bikes were dangerous, Wait until we go back to the late 1980s, where the Suzuki GSX-R 1100 delivered speed with zero mercy. Number 7 is the Suzuki GSX-R 1100. The Suzuki GSX-R 1100 wasn't just fast, it was fast in a way most riders weren't ready for. With a 1,127 cubic centimeter oil and air cooled inline four-cylinder engine, it pushed out close to 145 horsepower, depending on the year. That gave it a top speed around 175 miles per hour. But speed wasn't what made it dangerous. It was the mix of speed with a chassis that wasn't always ready for the fight. As the engine evolved over the years and got more aggressive, the frame and suspension didn't always keep up. Riders who went full throttle found themselves wrestling a machine that twisted under pressure. High-speed wobbles, especially on uneven roads or during hard cornering, became a known issue. At high speeds, even the smallest mistake could send a rider into a tank slapper or worse. What made it even riskier was its lack of modern safety features. There was no traction control, no anti-lock brakes, just raw, unfiltered power sitting beneath you. One wrong move on the throttle and the bike wouldn't forgive you. Many crashes were blamed not on the bike's outright speed, but on how unpredictable it became at the limit. But if the GSX-R was dangerous on pavement, the next bike proved you didn't need roads to risk your life. Number 6 is the Mo 700. The Mo 700 is often called the most powerful two-stroke production dirt bike ever built, and for good reason. Its single-cylinder, 685 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled engine delivered more than 80 horsepower and over 60 pound-feet of torque. On paper, it sounds impressive. In real life, it was terrifying. That much power in a machine weighing less than 250 pounds meant the Micro 700 wasn't just fast, it was explosive. Throttle control was everything, and for most riders, it was impossible to master. Crack it open even slightly too far, and the front wheel launched off the ground, or the rear tire slid out with no warning. The bike constantly fought to throw you off on dirt, on gravel, on anything that wasn't smooth pavement, which of course is the entire point of a dirt bike. But this wasn't built for weekend trails. It was built to test the limit of what one rider could physically control, and that limit came fast. The suspension was top tier, and the frame was built to be strong, but the sheer force of the engine often overwhelmed both. High-speed instability, wild jumps, and brutal landings were part of the deal. And when things went wrong, and they often did, the Mo had no forgiveness. There were no electronics to catch your mistakes, no traction control, just you, the engine, and gravity. And if you think that's wild, wait until you meet a motorcycle that swaps finesse for a full-blown car engine. Number 5 is the Boss Hose VR8. Built from the 1990s to the present, the Boss Hose 58 was built to shove a full-size car engine between two wheels and dare someone to ride it. At its core is a General Motors Vive 8, with engine sizes ranging from 5,700 to over 8,200 cubic centimeters. Some models produce more than 450 horsepower and over 450 pound-feet of torque. That's not just wild for a bike. It's flat-out insane. The danger isn't hard to see. This machine weighs around 1,100 pounds fully loaded, about double the weight of a typical sport bike, and yet it accelerates like a dragster. Twist the throttle, and the bike launches forward with brutal force. But good luck stopping it. Even with dual front discs and a large rear rotor, slowing down a half-to-non missile isn't easy. Stopping from high speed takes planning, and nerve and cornering feels more like steering a barge than riding a motorcycle. Lean angles are limited. Handling is stiff, and in tight spaces or heavy traffic, it becomes downright unwieldy. What makes the Boss Hose especially dangerous is the illusion of control. This isn't a bike you ride aggressively. It's one you hang on to. And if you're not prepared, the Boss Hose V8 will bury you under its own horsepower. But if the Boss Hose was outrageous by design, the next bike was a wolf in sheep's clothing. Compact, lightweight, and more lethal than it looked. Number 4 is the 1969 Kawasaki H1 Mach 2. Before there was the H2, there was the H1, the original Widowmaker. Kawasaki launched the H1 Mach 2 at the end of the 1960s with one goal in mind: dominate the performance charts. And they did. The H1 featured a 499 cubic centimeter air-cooled two-stroke triple engine that produced around 60 horsepower. That might not sound massive today, But in a bike that weighed just 384 pounds dry, it was borderline reckless. It could hit 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds, faster than many cars of its time. But all that speed came with serious consequences. Power delivery on the H1 was brutal. The torque came high in the rev range, and when it hit hard. The front end had a habit of lifting off the ground with barely a warning, and the rear tire spun up just as easily. Riders were either hanging on for dear life or flying off the back. And the problems didn't end there. The chassis was basic, the swing arm flexed under pressure, and the suspension was completely overwhelmed at high speeds. Cornering felt more like a gamble than a skill. And the brakes, drum front and rear, nowhere near enough to safely stop something this aggressive. The H1 Mach 2 quickly gained a reputation. It was fast, it was fun, and it was dangerous. Stories of violent highsides, frame failures, and uncontrollable wobbles became common. Kawasaki had built a beast that was ahead of its time in power, but far behind in everything else. But where the H1 was dangerous for being too raw, the next bike proved that even advanced tech could backfire hard. Number 3 is the 1982 Honda CX500 Turbo. On paper, it was supposed to be the future. Honda's CX500 Turbo was the world's first mass-produced turbocharged motorcycle, and it looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. With its angular bodywork, digital dash, and futuristic branding, it promised cutting-edge performance. And in terms of engineering, it was bold. A 497-centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin engine that made around 82 horsepower, nearly 30% more than its naturally aspirated sibling. But what made it exciting on paper made it unpredictable on the road. The turbo lag was the bike's biggest danger. Nothing happened for a second, then everything happened at once. Riders would twist the throttle expecting a steady pull, only to be launched forward, with a delayed surge of power that arrived suddenly and violently. It was nearly impossible to time your acceleration properly, especially mid-C corner or during overtakes. And that led to accidents. Many riders found themselves overshooting turns or losing rear-end traction just trying to pass traffic. It didn't help that the bike was heavy, over 570 pounds wet and not exactly nimble. The suspension was soft, the frame wasn't stiff enough for the power, and the brakes, while decent for the time, were still drum-assisted in the rear. This combination made the CX500 Turbo feel more like an experiment than a polished machine, and riders were the test subjects. Honda tried to sell the future, but what they built was a time bomb on two wheels. And while Honda took a risk with turbocharging, Harley-Davidson took a different kind of leap by blending drag racing DNA with cruiser culture. Number 2 is the Harley-Davidson V-Rod. When Harley-Davidson teamed up with Porsche to design the V-Rod's engine, they didn't just rewrite the company's legacy, they built one of the most aggressive cruisers the brand had ever seen. It was a bold departure from Harley's traditional style. At the heart of the V-Rod was a 1,131 cubic centimeter liquid-cooled V-twin engine that produced around 115 horsepower. Later models pushed even more. That kind of power combined with a low-slung drag-style frame turned heads and wrecked riders. The V-Rod wasn't dangerous because it was flawed. It was dangerous because it was misunderstood. Riders used to the lazy torque of a traditional Harley suddenly found themselves holding onto a bike that revved like a sport bike but weighed like a cruiser. It accelerated hard and fast, often catching riders off guard, especially in city traffic or aggressive takeoffs. The long wheelbase made it tough to handle in tight turns. The low foot pegs scraped easily, and at high speeds the front end felt light and unsettled. Braking was another issue. Despite having dual front discs, the bike's weight and momentum made stopping harder than most expected. It was a muscle cruiser dressed in Harley's leather, sleek and seductive, but built with a different kind of violence under the hood. Many riders who came to the V-Rod for the style stayed for the thrill, and some got more than they bargained for. Because when a cruiser stops behaving like a cruiser and starts biting like a dragster, the road gets real dangerous real fast. But even the V-Rod's muscle can't compare to what's coming next. The final entry on this list isn't just fast, it's banned from public roads for being too extreme. Get ready for the Kawasaki Ninja H2R. Number 1 is the Kawasaki Ninja H2R. Built from 2015 to the present, this isn't just a motorcycle. It's a missile with handlebars. The Kawasaki Ninja H2R is so extreme, so powerful, that it's not legal for the street anywhere in the world. And that's not a gimmick, that's a safety warning. This supercharged track-only machine comes with a 998 cubic centimeter inline four-cylinder engine bolted to a custom-built supercharger, pushing out an eye-watering 310 horsepower. With Ram Air, it jumps to 326. That's more than many high-end supercars, but this weighs under 480 pounds wet. And the result is a power-to-weight ratio so aggressive it can hit over 240 miles per hour. That's not an estimate. That's a tested top speed. And it's not just the speed that's dangerous. It's how fast everything happens. A twist of the throttle sends the rear tire screaming, the front wheel hovering, and the scenery turning into a blur. For riders without perfect throttle control, it's chaos waiting to happen. Even the H2R's aerodynamics make it dangerous. It features carbon fiber wings to help keep it on the ground. But at those speeds, a gust of wind or a minor steering input can still throw everything off. And while it has top-tier brakes and electronics, they don't rewrite physics. When something goes wrong at 200 plus miles per hour, no ABS or traction control can save you. This isn't a bike for most riders. In fact, it's barely a bike for any rider. It's a test of nerve control and mechanical violence wrapped in a racing suit. Because when a machine is so fast, it's banned from the streets. The real danger isn't what it can do, it's what you think you can do with it.